Okay, guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Let me see. What do I want to do first? Oh, okay. Um, okay, I'm gonna share my screen with you. There we go. Just minimize that. Um, okay, so you guys did a really awesome job with the drapery assignments. So we went over those on Tuesday. I had a good conversation with I think almost all of you guys, which is great. Um, so I had a couple of things I want to go over today. It's pretty much like the last the last little bit in terms of new content that I'm going to show you guys. Um, and then I'll kind of explain the homework. And then next week, next Thursday actually is our last class. So that's April 30th. So after that class, I'll get into, like what the final assignment is going to be, but basically it's just going to be a drawing assignment, sort of similar to the usual format, but it will have a couple of more recent elements that we've gone over. So like subject matter, like glass. Well, we're going over glass today, but like glass and metal, drapery. I think like a couple of other things. So it will just kind of encapsulate some of the more recent things that we've been working on since we transitioned to the online format. So again, I'll get into that. I'll touch on it at the end of today's lecture, and then get into it more on Tuesday and on Thursday of next week. So don't have to worry about that quite yet. But today we're going to go over glass and metal. So these two subjects are sort of they're sort of similar. They have like a lot of similar properties, but there are differences between the two, and I'll kind of just want to go over how I would recommend that you guys approach these two subjects in a way that like hopefully isn't too intimidating, because I think that this, similar to drapery, drawing like highly reflective metal or just like a transparent glass surface, it can be kind of scary to think about because there's so much to take in when you're looking at these. So hopefully these are some slides that will give you an idea of how I would approach it, and then I have a demo video to show you guys, and a demo video that I'll be putting up tomorrow on Blackboard to hopefully help you even further. But anyway, so I wanted to go over this. So when you're drawing something like a reflective metal, like highly polished surface, these are just some important things to remember. So what you're seeing essentially is light being bounced back at you from a highly polished surface. So that's what those reflections are. In other words, it's not absorbing a lot of the light. It's kind of shooting the light right back at us. And up until this point, for the most part, we have dealt with objects that are opaque and they absorb light, and they're sort of soft and they somewhat diffuse it. So unless, which I don't think any of you guys did, but unless you guys like dealt with patent leather or anything for your drawing assignment, probably haven't dealt with too much glass or metal. So so these are just a few things to remember. So the light that comes back directly from the light source is reflected back, as well as the light bouncing off the objects around the reflective surface. So that's an important thing to remember that I'll get into a little bit more. You've already been exposed to reflections that occur on non-reflective objects. So yeah, reflective light, which we've gone over. So it's, that little bit of light that sometimes is bounced back from a surface or object that's nearby to another object in still life. So it tends to be pretty subtle. And the reflections and their sharp edges are unique characteristics of highly reflective surfaces, which I'll get into again in a second. But and this is probably an important thing that you guys should consider too when you're drawing. The value of reflected light is always darker than the value of direct light. So in other words, this light here, since it's being hit with direct light, that's going to be darker than, let's say, if this area were reflected off. Oh, like perfect. So you see this reflection down here. You can see that this direct light source where it's actually hitting the object is, even though it looks similar and it's the same thing that you're drawing, technically it's like the same area of light, this one is going to be a lot more brilliant, and this one is going to be still very bright but less so, just because it is reflected, and it loses some of that brilliance and that brightness. So and this is sort of a visual representation of what I have just been talking about. The skull, you can see on the left, this sort of absorbs and diffuses the highlight on it, whereas these kind of chrome super metallic objects are going to bounce that light right back at us very clearly in like a mirror surface. So this is sort of just like a visual representation of that, which I found to be really helpful. So that's sort of self-explanatory, but so this oh, sorry, are you guys having trouble hearing? I could only hear part of that from Brittany.
Yeah, it keeps kind of cutting in and out with sound.
Oh, it's cutting in and out?
Yeah.
Oh crap. Okay, hold on one second. I'm gonna pause this for a second. Sorry, I'm just checking my internet connection. Is that any better for you guys, or is it still kind of choppy?
It's a little iffy, but better.
Okay. So let me see. I'm thinking. So I am recording this lecture. So hopefully, if you guys do have a little bit of trouble hearing me, the recording will hopefully be a lot clearer, and I'll post this after our class. So I apologize. I know the internet connection it's been iffy for us all week. So, but I will be posting this online. I'll view it before I post it to make sure that I'm visible and audible. And if I'm not, what I'll do is I'll re-record the lecture and I'll send an email to you guys just saying, okay, like I re-recorded it. Yeah, I don't know what's up with our internet, but yeah, okay. So I apologize for the choppy audio. I'll kind of do my best to check in with you guys, but I'm going to resume my screen share, and then and I'll kind of just keep going. I'll try to keep it brief. And hopefully you guys won't hear me with too much difficulty. But okay, so this artist on the left here, this is Kip Omelad. I really like his work. And this is an oil painting actually. And the thing that kind of lets us know that this is supposed to be like a chrome sort of portrait painting is those really, really distinct edges. So they're really hard. There is not a lot of blending in this. It is mostly kind of piecemeal pieces of value that are kind of cobbled together, but they're very, very specific to the shape of the face. So you can see like there are areas where it's picking up some of that like rich orange, but they're very specific to this like person's likeness. And when we did the drapery section, we did talk about the fact that distinct edges were characteristics of realistic / convincing drawings of reflective material. That's kind of what makes it appear to be shiny or reflective. So that is sort of like a really clear example of those really hard edges functioning in a way that's very clear to us. And one thing that I would recommend is once you have these general sort of big shapes down, so like this yellow around here and some of these highlights, like once you've got this down, I would, like at the very end, I tend to go back in and I try to get those really small little areas of light and shadow, like these little bands of contrast, so these little bands of highlight, because they can be really, really useful in just furthering that illusion of shininess or reflectivity, and also specificity. So like when I would say that a good area to do that, like he went in here on the lips and did these like little kind of tiny little pieces of dark and light, and even this yellow band in here that's like super helpful, because it's kind of describing this. This is supposed to be like a rounded sort of curved form. So that's something that I would recommend as well. Here are a couple of examples. You can see the one on the left and the one on the right. The one on the left is like a little bit duller. It's a silver like pitcher, it looks like, or some sort of decorative thing. I'm not exactly sure, but you can see that it's not polished quite up to this level of mirror finish. It's a little bit duller, and he did kind of translate that by blending out some of these forms and just not making the transition quite as harsh in a lot of areas. He did in some areas, but for the most part, it's not super reflective. But you do still get that shiny quality. And on the right, there it's a little bit more of a mirror finish, because you can see some of the reflections happening in the bottom of this kind of bowl. So it's a little bit more clear. So this is like the tip that I will always like refer back to when my students get lost or whatever in drawing a reflective surface. If they're getting lost, they're like, oh, I keep losing my place. Drawing the metals surface is a lot easier when you have objects all around, because you can find the picture within the picture, so to speak. So in this case, like the sphere here is functioning really well, because you can find that sphere right in the reflection, and there is a certain amount of distortion, and you do see some of the background shapes, and it does really like describe the light and shadow really well when you can kind of visualize what it's supposed to be. So like if you're trying to draw this sphere or this shape here, knowing, okay, this is actually a reflection of the sphere. This is going to be a reflection of the background. I'm not really sure what it is, but it looks like it might be, I don't know. I'm assuming easels of some sort, and then like it looks like industrial sort of like fluorescent lighting up top. But that would be really helpful as the artist to kind of know roughly what that is, and then just to make any distortions based on the shape of this sort of picture. And I have a couple notes about that. The reflections can appear distorted when reflected in a polished surface. The degree of distortion depends on the curvature of the surface. So if a surface is concave or convex, that is going to kind of distort it accordingly. And whether it's kind of bowing in or out is going to give you an idea of how you should just make any distortions in the reflection. So like this one is somewhat kind of rounded out on the bottom, and the spheres appeared also sort of elongated because it's kind of taller than this. So there are, a couple things happening here that kind of explain to us what that surface looks like. And this is a really clear example of finding the picture within the picture. This is MC Escher and this reflected sphere. You can see him in his studio and everything reflected, and even these two spheres are reflected accordingly. And they do sort of follow this curve of this whole sphere. So a question that comes up a lot is what do you do when you can't see the sharp edges of what's reflected? So sometimes the nature of what's being reflected on an object has edges that are difficult or impossible to kind of discern. So in the case of this like chrome pipe sort of detailing, we don't know exactly what's around it. We can only kind of guess. But that's okay, because the artist has taken this opportunity to kind of find anything that he can. So in terms of like these bands of light and dark, he's made sure to really portray them as accurately as possible and use those crisp divisions. And whatever this shape is back here, like we're not really sure what it is, but the fact that it's curving around this piece of metal is sort of enough to describe what is going on. And even though some of these reflections are really vague, he has capitalized on areas that they aren't vague. So you can see that this like reflection here is from above, and you can see that he really took care to, or he or she kind of took care to accurately draw this and use those areas where he does know what's being reflected to his advantage. And the same thing sort of like up here. And again, like we're not sure what's around this car piece, but the artist used these contrast bands of light and shadow and the distortion from this piping to kind of give us an idea of at least what the metal is doing and the fact that it is metallic. So training your eye to pick out these details is key, as these details will allow a subject to read as metallic. So yeah, just finding these little pieces of light and shadow is really going to help your drawing along. This is an important piece about drawing flares. So flares are, there are these like little kind of bursts that appear when light, like a direct light source, hits a surface, and it creates like a starburst effect. And so you guys, I'm sure, have seen these occur at some point. They're not always present in what you're drawing. Like they sometimes aren't, they don't appear for whatever reason, but they do often. And these are some examples of them. And this is one of the finishing touches that I will put on a drawing. Like I won't go for the flare right away. If anything, I may sketch out and sort of delineate where this might go later. But I kind of leave it until the very end because it's really easy to overwork these little details. So I find that the best tool to use with these are, for me, usually the kneaded rubber eraser. And rather than overdoing it, even if it doesn't look quite right, I'll kind of just leave it. And make minor adjustments if I need to later. But for the most part, it's really easy to overwork. So, here are a couple more examples of Willem Kalf and some flares that are happening in his paintings. And I did point out, like the picture in a picture shows this glass here, and you can see it. You can only see part of it here. It's somewhat obscured, but the fact that we can see this really clearly in a reflection really gives that mirror finish kind of weight. So yeah, and then here's just a quick summary of all the things that I sort of just went over. And I would say that these are like distilled down to the most important pieces of info here. And this is another Kip Omelad's, one of his paintings. But you can kind of refer back to these as needed, but it's sort of distilled down to the basics. So the next few images are about drawing clear glass, and they have a lot of it has a lot of similar properties to really reflective metal, but it is different in a lot of ways too. So I have kind of outlined some of the most like, I guess, prominent ways that they're different. So the most important thing to remember in drawing glass is to understand and simplify what you're seeing. So rather than, when I'm drawing glass, I will sort of mimic as much as possible the value changes, rather than focusing so much on the divisions between light and shadow, since a lot of the glass that I'll be drawing for the most part is usually clear. I will try to kind of replicate the value patterns rather than focus on the value divisions in the first stages of my drawing, if that makes sense. So to identify what you're seeing through glass and reflected in glass, look around surrounding objects to identify the shapes you're seeing. So this is sort of similar to finding a picture within a picture. So this is really clearly shown right here, where you can see all of these still life objects reflected in this clear glass. That's not always the case. If you have glass objects in a lighter setting, like in this photo here, you won't always see things reflected in them, but you may just see really bright, kind of glossy surface highlights. And that's okay. It sort of just depends on the situation. But when you begin your drawing, it'll kind of look like a mass of abstract values. And this is something that I cannot stress enough, that in the beginning stages, it does sort of look really abstract. And then all of a sudden it does come together once you start to refine the shapes as much as possible, and add in your really bright highlights and your dark contrasty shadows. Then all of a sudden it'll come together. So it's really easy to get discouraged at this stage, but I just can't stress enough that just stick with it, step away from your drawing, and then come back into it as much as you can, because it does take a little bit of time, and it's happened to me many times. So there are three things that when you're drawing clear glass, you can see that are different from anything we've covered so far. So you can see the thickness of the glass, especially like if it's a clear glass, even better. You can you have a suggestion of how thick this material is. You can also see objects behind the glass. So you can see right through them. In this case, this is the stem of a floor lamp. And you can see really clearly through there, and there is some distortion there. And you can see reflections of surrounding objects on the surface of the glass. Now, this is sort of similar to drawing mirror finish objects or highly reflective metal. So you can see them on the surface. You can't always. It does sort of depend on the conditions of your still life setup and on the color of the glass and how bright your highlight is and how close objects are. So there are a lot of variables, but those are three main differences. And here I have highlighted the stem of the floor lamp. You can see it really well through the glass, and I'm really glad that I included this in this photo. I just snapped this photo in my apartment, but I'm glad that this is a feature of it, because I think without it, it would have been a lot harder to draw this. Like that little bit of contrast in the middle was a really good anchor point for me when I was drawing it. So like when you're drawing metal or reflective objects, the distortion is going to occur on the surface where the curve is greatest. So right here, you can see this is really kind of a messed up area, and that's because this is the most rounded part of the bottle, aside from probably this handle here. The edge of the table is also distorted in here too. So if these were two opaque bottles, you obviously wouldn't see through them, and you would just kind of perceive this as a straight line going all the way through, but this does interrupt it to a degree. So that was something to notice as well. And again, that's a result of the curvature of the bottle. So as I mentioned before, similar to polished metal, we can see some reflections in the surface of the bottle. So right here, this little reflection, this like little area of contrast in this sort of darker line, I think that it's a reflection of this bottle's edge back here. I think that that's what I'm seeing. But again, you can't always see it. It's going to sort of depend on a lot of things, whether or not you can see so much in the surface reflections of the glass. But it appears similarly distorted as the lamp in the background due to the curved surface, like we just talked about. So, and again, this is sort of a summary of all of the things that I just sort of talked about. There are a couple of things at the bottom that I did not go over like directly, which if you tackle any of these topics when you're doing the homework assignment or when you're doing like the last assignment for the class, you can talk to me directly about it. Like I can help you out with that. But I didn't cover colored glass or colored liquid. And the reason for that is because a lot of the things about clear glass are the same or similar. Like a lot of the procedures are the same or similar when you're drawing clear glass. So the only thing that I would say is majorly different is that you put down a local value that's a lot darker than you would if it were clear glass. So in other words, you might, instead of sketching over the entire paper with an HB pencil or a B pencil or something and then smudging it out so you have light tone on the surface, you might draw out your basic sketch of like a dark wine bottle and then put like a 2B pencil or a 3B pencil over it to sort of just darken the entire thing down even more so. So that's sort of how you would handle that. And then clear liquids, they can magnify and distort things seen through them. The surface of a liquid is predictably sort of the lightest area and reflects objects around it. And opaque liquids, so those would be drawn like something like coffee, milk, whatever. Those are going to be drawn as if they're solid objects. Most liquids do allow a little bit of light to pass through, but not always. So if like you're drawing eggnog, that's probably not going to let any light through. So that is sort of the gist on metal and glass. And I realize it's a lot of material, but hopefully, you know, if you guys do have any questions about any of this, you can either ask me or refer back to the slideshow. I think it has a lot of good imagery in it about glass and metal. So hopefully that's helpful. I do have a demo video that I want to show you guys where I draw just those little bottles that you guys saw in the slideshow. So I've toned the paper. That's just sort of like what I do. I don't know why. I think I like to kind of knock that white back. So I've toned the paper really lightly. And now I'm just drawing it out, like drawing the general shape out with an HB pencil. And sort of just blocking everything in. And something that I do like to do, and I don't know if I mentioned it to this class, I mentioned it to my other class, but something I like to do is sort of delineate where something like really dark contrast is going to go, really light highlight, really, really bright highlight is going to go, etc. So I'll sort of like block them out, almost like a paint by number sort of feel to start. Just so that I know they always need to be adjusted. They always need to be refined, but at least I know like roughly where these things are going to go. So, so what I tried to do as best I could when I was getting the like local values in for this clear glass was I was just trying to replicate as well as I could what I was seeing in the setup. So replicate the value, any slight gradients I was seeing, any local values, which basically just means a specific area of the drawing and the lightness or darkness of that area. That's local value. And now it's sort of, after I've got these basic overall values in, I go in and I add gradients that I was seeing. So just like bringing in a little bit of a B pencil, an HB pencil, something like that. After I kind of got the general in, now I'm getting into the more specific areas and bringing out those highlights a bit just so that they don't get lost while I'm using my blender. And the blender, if you choose to use graphite for this assignment or charcoal, I mean, you can use the blender, of course, but that can be a really useful tool. Just because the surface of glass or metal is so smooth, that being able to kind of softly like smooth out an area with like a really soft paper stump, oftentimes is a good method of drawing it. And as I have said countless times, like it does pick up some of the value left behind on the page from graphite or charcoal, and it can become like a really light touch drawing instrument in a way. So it's kind of cool in that way. And then once I've got like major areas in of lights and darks, whatever, sorry, I'm just like laughing because I can see my nose like creep into this a little bit occasionally in the video, but I go in after a little bit of like noodling around on the page, I go in with either a really hard pencil, so like a 2H or an HB something, or even a B pencil. And I go in and I really do try to get any fine details, any fine like lips of the jar, or little tiny bands of value or highlight or whatever. And I do try to get really specific as best I can with like an H pencil and just harden up some of those edges where appropriate. So I didn't work this drawing up quite as much as I would have liked to, but the one thing I wanted to note was that the cast shadow is an area where you can also kind of further convey the fact that this is a transparent object. So especially when you're drawing glass, acknowledging that light does shine through here. Like this isn't great for the light shining through the cast shadow. Like I don't think it's quite as accurate as it was in the still life, but it does actually further suggest the material. So it's a really helpful aspect too. So all that being said, I do just want to go over the homework assignment quickly. You can ask any questions, and then I'll let you guys go for the day. But so the homework, I'm going to assign it. it should be live. I think it's up on Blackboard for you guys. It's visible. But the homework assignment is going to be due in a week. So that's the 30th. That's actually also our last day of class. So we will have like mini critiques as well as like a brief lecture in the beginning of class just to go over like the final assignment. But what I would like you to do is to choose 4 household objects. So I was specific. I'd like you to do 1 clear glass object. You can do certainly more. Like if you want to do more than 4 objects for this assignment, like go for it. If you want to do multiple glass or multiple metal, that's fine. These are just sort of minimum requirements. But choose 1 clear glass object. So cups, bowls, candle holders, jars, whatever. And 1 metal object, so pots, pans, silverware, car parts, pipes, like whatever you have hanging around that has like a chrome or really highly polished surface that's going to reflect. You can choose that. And then 2 simple objects of your choice. So these objects are really kind of going to be pawns in your still life setup. The still life is going to be less about them and more about how they lend themselves to the setup. So like the fact that they can be reflected in like a metal bowl, or the fact that they can provide a nice contrast in the background of a clear cup. So in other words, you're going to kind of place them strategically so that they give you little anchor points through your drawing. So just like this floor lamp stem, and how that anchored me in my drawing, and I was able to like kind of move out from there. That is kind of what these objects are going to be. So they can be really simple. They don't have to be anything crazy. So I think I had a couple of suggestions, like a simple like fake plant, unlit candle that's like tall and like maybe a darker value, coffee mug, you know, just anything that you have hanging around that you think would kind of make an interesting sort of like counter object in your setup. So assemble them obviously in a way that is visually interesting. So this is just an example. These are just a couple of like shiny and glass objects. I just kind of threw them together. There isn't really a rhyme or reason, but you can see like the background, the plant back there, like that's certainly going to help me draw this glass object back here. It's going to provide some interesting reflections. So you know, just set this up in a way that's interesting. And if you feel like you've chosen an object that is maybe really complex and like you bit off more than you could chew, I've said it before to you guys and I'll say it again, like don't be afraid to switch out that object. So if you choose like a really awesome wine glass and you're like, crap, this is really proving difficult for me, switch it out to just like a normal glass that doesn't like, you know, taper at the top. You know, just make it easier for yourself. I certainly don't want you guys to be like pulling your hair out when you're doing this. So it'll be due a week from today. And as usual, use a direct light source to cast dramatic light and shadow on your objects. And this, like the drapery assignment, is going to be pretty important. Because as you can see, like the light and the shadow, and making sure that you can see them clearly on the objects and under the objects. And that's going to play a really big role in your being able to render them and render them accurately, because it is going to illuminate the entire form of your objects. So so I think in this photo, I have like a lamp over to the right. It's not obviously in the photo, but it was coming up and from the right side, and obviously casting really nice shadow over here. And there's a lot of interplay in here as well. So so that is the homework assignment. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I have no questions.
Sorry, Justin, what was that?
I have no questions.
No questions. Okay, awesome. So what I want to just say real quick is, so I'm trying to be pretty lenient with you guys this semester with like turning in late homework assignments and, you know, missing class, whatever. And I wanted to say that you guys will have until April 30th. So that's a week from today. April 30th will be the last day that I'll be accepting like late homework assignments or, you know, missing assignments, whatever. So if you're missing any assignments, it is going to be your job to check in the course content page, go to the assignments folder, And just go through and just make sure that you've submitted something for each of these. They're all up here, and if you click any of them, they will bring you right to the discussion board where you post. So you can just click into this, you can see the prompt, which is right here. And then you can just see like if you have submitted. That's all you got to do. So that, yeah, so that being said, like Thursday, the next Thursday, that'll be the last day that you can turn in the work. It's kind of going to be the cap day. So you'll just have to check and make sure you got everything in on time. And what else? I want to make sure I covered everything with you guys. So you got the homework assignment, late work. Yeah. Oh, and I'll get more into the final assignment. I know I touched on it earlier. I'll get more into the final project for this class. Obviously, it's not going to be an exam, but it will just be a final project where sort of all of the ingredients of the new topics that we've covered since going online. So things like drapery, metal, glass, composition, all that stuff. Those will just be sort of like bullet points for you to include in the final drawing. So it'll sort of just be your like your chance to like show off all of the things that you've learned or the things that you're interested in. And again, I'll formally assign that next week. And then I believe that the day that we'll have like our final exam day where it'll be due and we'll have a quick like conversation, you and I, it'll just be one-on-one. That'll be on May 12th. So again, I'll go over all of this very much in detail next week. And there'll be like a formal post about it. And I feel like there was one more thing that I wanted to tell you guys. No, maybe that's it. Oh, so I showed you guys the time lapse of me drawing clear glass. I am working on one of me drawing reflective, like really shiny silver. So I have a couple objects I've been just working on. I just have to finish it up and put it all together. And that should be online by tomorrow, but I will send you guys just like a quick email saying, oh, hey, like if you want to watch this, it's online now so that you guys all know. But does anybody have any questions on any of that? And I realize I might not be coming through very clearly because of the internet, which is fine. So if you have any questions like that you weren't able to ask or you can't hear me or something, just send me an email or a message and we'll work on it. But yeah, does anybody have any questions about any of that stuff?
No questions.
No questions. Okay.
No.
Okay, perfect. So I guess in that case, I will let you guys go for today, and then we will check in again on Tuesday and go over a couple of things. And then, yeah, it's our last week of class, so kind of crazy, but yeah.